let's follow up with the Iroquois. You see their flag there, 5 symbols. The Iroquois from near what's now Lake Ontario, one of the Great Lakes, and as a Great Lake tribe, they controlled territory predominantly in what is now the state of New York. If we look at this, it says the Seneca are the keepers of the western door. Then there's the Cayuga, the Onondaga, keepers of the central fire, the Oneida, and the Mohawk. As you can tell by the map, you can see where the Seneca controlled where, not too far away from what will become Niagara Falls. If you look at the Seneca flag, you will see the tree. Again, there it is, the Great Tree of Peace, as is on the Iroquois flag. You will also notice the clans that surround the tree. The clan law, if a member of the clan is injured or killed, is the duty of his clan to seek justice through retribution, an eye for an eye, like the Hammurabi Code, which began a cycle of bloodletting among the 5 nations. You can discuss this. We'll discuss this quite a bit later when we discuss the Great Law by Ingenuity, which was a PBS digital studio presentation. If you go and you click the link that deals with the Great Peace, it will say, I think it's Dekanawida, and the 5 nations, Confederate Lords, I plant the tree of peace. I name the tree of the great long leaves. And so we see here the beginning of the 5 tribes in their development of their own constitution and their confederation. As a result of that, if you go down to rights and duties and qualifications of the lords, it says a bunch of certain number of shell wampum strings, each 2 spans in length, shall be given to each female families in which the lordship titles are vested. In other words, the 5 nations are creating a matrilineal system where the females are in charge of essentially electing the males who are going to become the chief. As a matter of fact, in section 19 it says, if any chief disobeys, when the lord is deposed by the women, shall notify the Confederate lords. The women then will select another of their sons as a candidate, and the lord shall elect him. In other words, there was a form of checks and balances in their matrilineal system, and this, some have indicated that this may have inspired Ben Franklin. But what is clear is that they developed a very, if you read it, it's a very lengthy document. Originally, it was sections were held by historians, tribal historians, and so they were able to repeat it almost at will. Now, if you look at the Smithsonian map of colonization before 1675, you'll notice that there's no incursion into the area that belongs to the 5 nations. But by 1603, Champlain, who is coming down from what is now Montreal, will make contact with the Eastern Door, or the Mohawk. During this time, France will begin arming the Huron, who are the adversaries of the Iroquois. Now, ironically, the Huron are Iroquois, speak a similar language as the 5 nations. And the Huron Confederacy is called Huronia by the French. In early 1615, around that time, maybe 1609, they are being given guns. Well, the Wyandot tribe of Oklahoma claim that they are not the Wendat Confederacy necessarily from the Huron, but in their history they do say they came in contact with the Hurons who tried to expel them but were unable to do so. The French found them in alliance with the Hurons, but record that they had but recently been at war with that people. When the Jesuits went among the Hurons, the Wyandots were part of the Huron Confederacy. Their history from this point is well known. and their villages were near what's now Niagara Falls. So we at least have one tribe, well, two tribes that are combined in one, the Seneca Cayuga, which is from the original Five Nations, and we also have a representative of the Huron Confederacy, which is the Wyandot here in Oklahoma. So in 1624 and 1626, the Dutch move into what is now Manhattan. Supposedly they purchased it from Lenape, but by 1628, because they are setting up their own colonization along the Hudson River, they start arming the Iroquois. Now, the reason this is important, if you look, by the way, you'll notice that the Dutch flag was pretty much copied by the city of Albany, and then it was modified by the city of New York. So when you see those flags, it goes back to the heritage in the days of the Dutch control. Two famous Dutch descendants that became presidents, one was Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt. The Roosevelts are from some of the earlier Dutch colonists. So Dutch traders on the Hudson River in present-day New York State provided them with firearms. As a result, the Five Nations began to exert their military strength. And in 1628, they pushed the Mohicans east, and by the 1630s, the Mohawk began to raid the Algonquin in the Ottawa Valley. Another tribe in Oklahoma that is Algonquin, and we'll talk about quite a bit, is the Ottawa. When the Iroquois War breaks out in 1641 to 1701, it forced many northeastern tribes west into the Great Lakes region. The refugees of the Iroquois incursions were forced to flee into neighboring Indian countries, leaving behind their homelands. Among these Great Lake nations forced to flee was one that is called the Kickapoo. The incessant depredations of the Iroquois had forced the Kickapoo to flee to neighboring Wisconsin, and this area was occupied largely by the Winnebago and the Menominee nations. So another tribe in Oklahoma that became involved in the Iroquois Wars. Now, we have approximately in this state we have the Sac and Fox, the Ottawa, the Miami, the Loyal Shawnee, the Potawatomi, the Kickapoo, the Absentee Shawnee, and the Eastern Shawnee, who can trace their specific nations being invaded by the Iroquois because they've gotten guns. The Iroquois have gotten guns from the Dutch. The reason this is important is because these tribes will then align themselves with France. So by the 1640s, the Mohawk and the Oneida were attacking settlements in New France and raiding the colonies of the Algonquin allies throughout the St. Lawrence Valley. That includes the Hurons and what will become the Wyandot. By 1642, the French had begun to halt these raids by building a chain of fortified settlements as far upriver as Montreal. The French tried to counter the Mohawk acquisition of firearms by arming their Wyandot and Algonquian allies. So as a result of this, what you're seeing is intertribal warfare caused because two European powers are wanting control of the fur trade. The raids begin in 1642 against more isolated villages. In 1649, 1,000 Seneca and Mohawk will attack two main villages. Some of the Wendat try to hold out on nearby island but are forced to disband. Some flee to Quebec, and others join another Iroquois tribe that were called by the French the Neutral, because they were just peaceful. They just wanted to trade. As a result, in 1651, the Iroquois will invade them and will defeat them. In the winter of 1649 to 1650, the Iroquois, in fact, were attacking the Nipissing and the Petun. In 1653, they started facing stiff resistance from France. Started facing resistance from the Five Nations, and the Confederacy then entered into a peaceful relationship with France. By 1667, Mohawk villages are burned by the French Carigna regiment. By 1675, the Five Nations had absorbed the Susquehannock to the south and had moved westward again into the Ohio Valley, where they fought the Illinois and the Miami Nations. The Miami, as we mentioned, are now located here in Oklahoma. So by 1701, the Iroquois Wars will create the Great Peace Treaty with France. There's over 1,300 native delegates that will show up from 39 tribes. And the primary tribes that are in Oklahoma now that signed were the Kickapoo, the Miami, the Ottawa, the Peoria, the Potawatomi, the Sac and Fox, and obviously the Seneca Cayuga with the other Iroquois. So as we talk about shaping history, there's probably the most influential tribe that has shaped a lot of what we now consider modern American history. It definitely would be the tribe that's located in Oklahoma, and that is the Seneca Cayuga. Very powerful, very interesting.